We compete. There are areas where we compete, and it's in those areas where we have to come to an agreement that works. But there are more areas where we are stronger together, and that's what we're focused on. And we're going to get the right deal for America, right deal, obviously, from my perspective, for Canada.
Prime Minister Mark Carney made his second trip to the Oval Office to meet with U.S. President Donald Trump. Although Carney left Washington empty-handed in terms of a deal, both the President and Prime Minister were optimistic that a deal on tariff relief will be struck. In the meantime, Ottawa continues to put forward measures to support Canada's economy in the face of those tariffs. The latest, a new industrial strategy meant to bolster key Canadian sectors, including doing things like protecting jobs through procurement and buying Canadian by boosting demand at home, leveraging Canada's tech and energy sectors to create jobs, and attracting global talent to make Canada the top destination for science and research at universities. But with no trade deal on the horizon, will this be enough? Mélanie Joly is the Minister of Industry. Minister, nice of you to make the time. Appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, Rosie.
I want to talk more about your industrial strategy because it is, I think, very much in direct response to the economic threats from Donald Trump. But I will start, obviously, with that because you were in the Oval Office this week with the Prime Minister. What did you take, and I know you won't go into details of the negotiations, but what did you take away from that meeting in terms of momentum and the idea that we might be able to get some relief in a particular sector?
Well, I think you saw that there was a very respectful discussion and tone from between the Prime Minister and the President. I think one of the challenges that we all have as a delegation and the Prime Minister has is, and it's the case, by the way, for all countries dealing with the U.S. right now, is that there's only one decision maker in the U.S. administration, and it's President Trump himself. So it's really important for the Prime Minister to be able to have FaceTime with him, to be able to sit down with him one-on-one, to have conversations, because at the end of the day, he's going to be the one that will be striking the deal. So that was also part of the ongoing engagement, making sure that they could really build on that relationship. And I think that's why the outcome this week was a positive one. Well, we know that, no deal has been struck. We know that negotiations are going ahead in the right direction.
I'm glad you made the point about one decision maker because, as you know, Howard Lutnick then went on to give a speech and speak to a Canadian audience and suggested that the auto industry would not be part of any further trade deal. And that, I know, is directly probably of concern to you. How did you take those comments and how concerned are you about the auto sector? Because when the auto sort of stakeholders heard that, they felt like maybe they were being left behind in trade talks.
Well, when U.S. officials talk, we need to make sure that we listen and that we take good note of what they're saying. So it's not as if what the Secretary of Commerce has mentioned is not worth listening, although indeed there's only one decision maker, to my point. Let me be clear, and I've said that in numerous interviews this week. Well, after the comments by the U.S. Commerce Secretary, we will fight for every single job in the auto sector. These are our jobs. These are our people. And we'll make sure that we stand with them, that we work with them. We've done so because we had a remission process, which is a way for car companies in Canada to be exempted from countermeasures, which at the time we had in place. And then we've also put on the table the Strategic Response Fund, which is a really important fund of $5 billion to support through strategic investments these different plants. Also, it's important, Rosie, for our viewers to understand that more than 60% of the car making in Canada is done through Toyota and Honda, which are Japanese car makers. And I'll be heading to Japan to have conversations with the global CEOs of these plants a bit later this month. So I've been in contact with Lana Payne, who's the head of Unifor, representing so many workers. I've been in contact with also many CEOs in the sector, including also important voices from the sector, Flavio Volpe. But we need to make sure that we have a very strong stance and a good strategy.
So let's pivot back to what you were talking about this week, sort of in response to all of this, the industrial strategy. Explain to me how that is going to potentially make up for a loss of market in the United States or a loss of a trading partner in some sectors.
Well, we know we're too dependent on the U.S. That's the case. That's because we've built our economy a lot based on free trade with the Americans. And 70% of our production, nearly, when we export, is going to the U.S. So I presented a strategy which was about protecting jobs, creating jobs, and attracting talent and investment. But at the same time, we just saw Irving Shipyard for the first time in 15 years of building ships for our Navy has made its first order of Canadian steel to Algoma. So that's good news. And we're seeing C-SPAN in Vancouver, which is another big shipyard, making another agreement with Algoma. So we need to see more of that. But fundamentally, in terms of creating jobs, what we need to do is we'll have a new defense industrial strategy, which will increase the potential of great jobs for people in different sectors. And my last point is we want to build more great Canadian companies. We have great Canadian companies that have influence in the world. What we need more. We need to scale them up, and we need more of that.
What are the policy measures that you will put in place to attract foreign investors, allow for Canadian companies to grow? Like, what are the mechanisms you're going to use? It can't just be, Canadian companies want to help each other. I would imagine they also want to get something out of it.
Of course. So when you look at the defense industrial strategy, what we can do is to use the power of procurement, because companies at the end of the day, Rosie, want contracts rather than subsidies. They can plan, they can hire people, they can really be able to invest, do more R&D. The other thing also, to attract foreign direct investments, and obviously we're seeing that through our major projects, $60 billion worth of private investments in 5 projects that the Prime Minister announced in September. So that's also a good way to attract foreign direct investment. And my last point is we want to make sure we cut red tape, that we're able also to offer stability in terms of environment, because a lot of investors are looking at different jurisdictions and are thinking that there may be sometimes too much risk because of instability. And so right now, Canada has this great potential of attracting capital from the world because of our stable democracy and our good environment to invest. So I'll continue to work on that for sure.
Okay, we will leave it there. Minister, thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Rosie. Pleasure.
U.S. tariffs on steel and aluminum rose to 50% back in June, forcing many in the sector to reassess their business with U.S. markets and adjust to the tariff uncertainty. One of those companies has been Algoma Steel in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario.
Algoma Steel, we just invested to make sure that they would have loan support, $400 million. But you know what? Well, Algoma Steel business model was basically linked to the U.S. auto market. Last week, they got a new order of steel from Irving Shipyard in Halifax.
That pivot to shipbuilding, just one of the moves made by the century-old steel company to adapt to the new reality facing the sector. Michael Garcia is the CEO of Algoma Steel. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you, Rosemary.
I think we haven't spoken since the tariffs came into place back in the spring, and obviously things have changed. They've gotten worse. The tariffs have gotten higher. But give me a sense of how you're doing right now in terms of dealing with the tariffs at 50%.
Well, it's needless to say, it's been a very difficult and challenging time for Algoma Steel. Initially 25% and then 50% tariffs has effectively closed the U.S. market to us. That's 60% of our historical volume. Initially, we held on to much of that business and absorbed the significant financial losses in the hope that this would be a temporary disruption, that a deal might be reached around the G7 summit and then the 1st of August and a couple of other deadlines. But I think as the summer wore on and our financial cost of not doing anything drug on, we realized that we had to take action. Even though we didn't really know what the future held, we had to take action, and that's what we've done with securing the government loan and announcing our early transition to EAF steelmaking at Algoma Steel.
Okay, and I want to talk a little bit more about some of that adaptation that you've been sort of forced to do, but may work out in terms of being a positive. But tell me what you're hearing after the Oval Office meeting, because certainly it seems from the government perspective that steel and aluminum is sort of the first area where they might get some sort of resolution.
Yes, we're definitely hearing that in both, all the public comments from those involved in the discussions on both sides of the border, on both the U.S. side and the Canadian side. So that brings some optimism. Again, the U.S. And more than specifically than the U.S. administration, but specifically President Trump is nobody's ever gotten rich trying to predict what he's going to do. So we are cautiously optimistic, but I do think from everything that we're hearing and that we understand that a deal is getting closer, but we just don't know the timing and we don't know the specifics.
Yeah, tell me what would be reasonable to expect, because it doesn't sound, and I'm sure you would agree with me, that the president is willing to give up tariffs. So would you be able to operate if you had, if it was a lower tariff and you knew it was going to stick around, or if you were given some sort of quota that you could work with? What is realistically going to be okay for you and for the company?
Right. Well, at Algoma Steel, we realize that we have to have a way to operate and to thrive in whatever environment we're in. And
Right.
We're right now in the 50% tariff environment. We have a pathway to change our future, take control of our production and thrive in the future domestic market that might even include a 50% tariff, prolonging for a long period of time, but certainly something less than significantly less than 25%. So, in that 10 to 15% is kind of the what I've been hearing, kind of on the unofficial pathways that I've been listening to. Can we thrive on that? Certainly, it's not ideal. It would put us still at a disadvantage, but certainly it would be a much better position than we are in today.
Yeah.
Could we win back all the business that we lost under 50%? No, I don't think so. Some of that business is very difficult to win back, and even a 5% tariff disadvantage would make that challenging. But certainly it would help, and it would help the industry, and it would put a little wind in our sails to help us move forward with everything else that's challenging in our future.
So the other piece of this that you alluded to off the top where there was how you are sort of retooling and restructuring in order to perhaps be more present in the domestic market. I was speaking with Minister Joly a bit earlier, and she talked about the deal between Irving Shipyard and your company to provide steel for their ships. What other areas do you see as potential new business within the country, inside Canada?
You're right, Rosemary. We see Algoma Steel a big part of our future, regardless of what happens with the U.S. trade relationship. I think a big part of our future is being the foundational bedrock of the steel industry in Canada. And that means being able to supply future demand in shipbuilding, in defense.
Yeah.
And the beautiful thing about steel is it's such a fantastic building material for nations that almost any economic activity that's happening in the country. So there's opportunity almost everywhere we look, as long as the fundamental driver is growth and building Canada.
So isn't that interesting that something that, was targeting your company and could have seen a collapse of your company has pushed you in a different direction to try and find a way to find other places to sell what you have inside this country? I know you've got a new electric furnace. You're doing all sorts of different innovative things that maybe you wouldn't have done as quickly before.
Well, I think what happened over the last couple decades is, I would say, the Canadian steel industry, but also, frankly, the government kind of lost sight and lost focus on what it means to have and how important it is from a strategic standpoint to have a healthy, thriving domestic steel industry that primarily serves the domestic steel market. And over time, as foreign steel, much of it unfairly traded, as unfairly traded foreign steel moved into Canada and captured segments of steel demand. So the Canadian steel industry turned its eyes to the U.S. Market. We had much more stable, predictable customers in the U.S. We didn't have quite as much foreign competition, and we were able to build healthy businesses on the backs of a free trade agreement with the U.S. But that's all been knocked on its ear, so to speak, and it's been changing. And so we have to really understand, hey, we are not happy with a lot of the dynamics of the Canadian steel industry, and we need to do something about it. I think the industry needs to do something about it, but frankly, the government has a role to play as well, and they've been playing that role. They put in tariffs and quotas earlier in the year on foreign steel. Many in the industry are arguing that more needs to be done, that it needs to go further, but it is starting to have an effect, and we continue to have conversations with the government about what's the right amount of tariffs and quotas to put on foreign steel to ensure a healthy domestic steel markets. And so, yeah, I would say that that's been a benefit to Canada, but it's been a very painful time, and it's been a very hard time on the Canadian steel industry.
Well, Michael Garcia, let's speak again, particularly if there's some resolution or improvement in the situation. Always nice of you to make the time, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Rosemary.
The government is under growing pressure after the Prime Minister's return from Washington. The high-stakes meeting at the Oval Office wrapped up without a deal, but there were some signs of possible cooperation. So how much progress has been made? What's next for Canada-U.S. relations? Let's bring in our Sunday Scrum. Russo, a writer for The Economist, former CBC Parliamentary Bureau Chief, Charelle Evelyn, the managing editor of The Hill Times, and Jason Markusoff, a producer and writer for CBC News, and he's in Calgary. Rob, I'm going to start with you. It certainly, the atmosphere was good in the Oval Office, and I think that those things do matter. And Dominic LeBlanc stayed on a few more days to keep talking about steel and aluminum. But at this stage, there is nothing tangible from that meeting. And I wonder whether you think there has to be at some point here soon.
Yes, but that doesn't mean that there isn't something. Here's what we know, Rosemary. We know that there is an evolving nature to the relationship between Donald Trump and Mark Carney. These guys are chalk and cheese. No one expects them to be best bros. But the Prime Minister had been urged over the last few months to develop a different kind of relationship with President Trump, where he wasn't always calling him just to complain about trade disputes. And it seems that's the case. Ahead of the meeting, the Prime Minister said that they talk about a whole bunch of things that President Trump has consulted him on international issues. And he also went on to compliment President Trump in an interview with The Economist, in which he said that the guy's very sharp, very curious, solicitous of his views, and stated the obvious in that he can change the dynamic very, very quickly on issues like Gaza, Ukraine, and international trade. So the other thing, and I think you played a role in this, Rosemary, what we saw out of this meeting is that the discussion between Canada and the U.S. is getting broader and deeper. Your reporting on Keystone was manifest of that. So that told us that despite attempts by the Prime Minister's staff to really lowball expectations ahead of this meeting, some serious work had gone into it ahead of time, which is perfectly normal when you get a meeting like this at the summit. It wasn't just a haphazard invitation at the UN General Assembly that prompted this. Some serious work had gone into it. That field, those discussions are getting broader and deeper. The other reality is that we're probably going to have a lot of trouble with our auto industry for decades to come if this goes ahead the way it looks like it. And the awkward reality for Prime Minister Carney is he governed in campaign poetry against Donald Trump and the United States, and now he has to govern in realpolitik prose, and that prose is we continue to need the United States. It remains indispensable to us. Your last guest was proof positive of that. Despite the appeals of overseas diversification in our trade, the United States is hours away by rail and by truck, and it still is the most lucrative market in the world. So Mr. Carney has to make that clear to Canadians. We still need Donald Trump's America.
Charelle, Rob was referring to Keystone XL, which my understanding is was brought up as here's an area where we can work together, because obviously the president and the prime minister see each other as competition in some sectors. And as Rob alluded to there, autos really does appear to be one of those, with Howard Lutnick telling a group of business people this week that won't be included in a future trade deal. That is not the direction the U.S. wants to go. I mean, that is very troubling, even if Canada gets some relief on steel and aluminum tariffs.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that we know about Donald Trump is that he loves to win. In any arena, he wants to be seen as the winner. So if there's something that Canada can put on the table to say, hey, if we are able to work on this sector like autos, we can shift and give you something that looks like a win for you on something like Keystone XL, which he had approved and Democratic presidents, tore up the permits for, canceling the project. But in the meantime, I think domestically it does, when you're trying to give Trump that win, it does create some issues at home, because you have people who are worried about the environment. You have people who are worried about more deeply ingratiating ourselves into the U.S. market at a time when we're supposed to be theoretically diversifying away from that. You also have worries from within the sectors themselves and people wondering, are we being thrown under the bus here? You have automakers, you had people like Flavio Volpe kind of calling out premiers in the prairies who are now looking to China and saying we're willing to drop tariffs as Canada drops EV tariffs, and they're saying, hey, don't throw us under the bus here. Yeah. We all want to work together as Team Canada. And you have, New Brunswick saying, we're looking at ways of retaliation. You have Ontario Premier Doug Ford saying, we should be striking back harder, and they want to be read in because they don't know what's happening. So things are starting to fracture. And I think the longer it goes on, the more those fractures are going to become more apparent.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent observation, Jason, that splinters are starting to appear in the Team Canada approach. And when you hear the Prime Minister, as he said on Friday, that there might be a CUSMA, a new NAFTA going forward, but there might also be side deals attached to it in these particular sectors. You can see how this could get competitive and difficult for certain industries and for the government.
I mean, there were two major takeaways I took from the Oval Office meeting. One was, the great rapport and the two-way rapport, the two-way praise that we were. I mean, a lot of other world leaders have come to Washington to lavish praise on Donald Trump. Not often do them, especially not the Democratic leaders, get so much back as Donald Trump gave to Mark Carney. The other thing that struck me was the extent to which Donald Trump kept on referring to trade in this relationship as natural conflict in a way that you just don't hear other world leaders do. And in terms of the interprovincial differences in tone, the economic reality couldn't be more different. In BC, in New Brunswick, you have severe suffering from the lumber tariffs, perhaps more. In Ontario and Quebec, auto, steel, and aluminum are really hammering their economies. In Alberta and Saskatchewan, their agricultural products and oil products are going south the border normally, which is why because Trump seems to see that product as, we should integrate our North American markets in a way that, for generations, they were doing the same on auto. So, and one of the interesting things about your reporting, Rosie, on the Keystone XL pipeline is the idea that the trade-off, the win for Trump, could be buying more products or Canada selling more product into the United States, as opposed to, say, making concessions on other products like dairy or cultural products.
I should say that just because I know that some farmers watch, there is canola that is being, they can't sell to China. So agricultural issues remain, although they're not necessarily with the U.S. Okay, I'm out of time. Yeah. I'm very sorry. But that was a very good round. You were all very, very smart. Enjoy your Thanksgiving turkey. Rob Russo, Charelle Evelyn, Jason Markusoff. Have a good Sunday. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye, all.
Bye.